The playoffs are here, and the Maple Leafs give us an indication of what Game 1 will look like. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. Make a play at Canada's choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies. David Alter and Paul Hendrick teeing up Game 1 of the Toronto Maple Leafs Stanley Cup playoffs. This is the first Rink-Wide Toronto pre-playoff edition. We'll be with you the rest of the way. And you know what, Henny? This is what we've been waiting for. The Leafs had a playoff practice for the first time. That first day, the other day, was just kind of a skills day. Only 17 players took the ice. But this was when the Maple Leafs did it for real. They wear the gear that says Stanley Cup playoffs on their hoodies and all this stuff. And the backdrop changes to the Stanley Cup playoffs logo. And we finally got a look at how the Toronto Maple Leafs will look for Game 1 of the playoffs. And much to the surprise of, I would say, nobody, I didn't really think this would happen, but the biggest takeaway from the Toronto Maple Leafs playoff lines was that Matthew Knies is not going to be a part of it, at least the way it projects right now. It looks like the first line will be Austin Matthews centering the line with Michael Bunting and Mitch Marner. Ryan O'Reilly will center the second line with John Tavares and William Nylander, which was a look that we've seen as well. Noel Acciari centers the third line with Alex Kerfoot and Calle Jarnkrok, and David Kampf centering a line with Aston Reese and first-time dad Sam Lafferty. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. On defense, it's going to be Jake McCabe with TJ Brody, Mark Giordano on a pair with Justin Hall, and Morgan Riley with Luke Schenn. But let's go back up front. And Henny, not a surprise to me that a rookie who's only had 3 games in the regular season, has not even seen Scotiabank Arena yet, doesn't factor into this one. What do you make of the way the Leafs look here for Game 1?
Well, I think, Dave, you got to honor the guys who got you there. And Matthew Knies, when the other guys were getting you there, was taking Minnesota to the final 2, him a frozen 4, only to have his heart broken by Quinnipiac, but he's going to get in. I think there's going to be an opportunity for him. And what I like about Matthew Knies is his size. I mean, it rhymes with Knies, and he's got great hands, and his feet are pretty good. I don't think they're exceptional, but they're pretty good. And I think somewhere along the line, whether it be a Zach Aston Reese or maybe a Sam Lafferty, to see one of those guys come out, depending on injuries or a tweak to the lineup that's needed, Knies will get in. It's a situation that Sheldon Keefe has, and he's had for the last 7 weeks. He has choices, and we're going to talk a lot about those choices here today. One of these is to have Matthew Knies, a top 3 contender for the Hobey Baker Award, sitting and waiting in the wings. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as you honor the guys. Sam Lafferty, interesting enough, has only played 1 more playoff game in his career than Matthew Knies. That was back with Pittsburgh a few years ago. But he'll get another chance. We just know what that fourth line can do with ZAR, Kemp, and Lafferty, and I don't think you want to mess with that. So I think Knies will have to sit for the time being, and that's fine.
Yeah, so you know what? It's interesting because I look at that fourth line, and it's been pretty much locked in with the exception of Lafferty sustaining a little bit of a minor injury. He said he's over that now, and then when he went home to Arizona where his wife is, to be there for baby Hudson, but Hudson was born on Friday. So he had the day he came back. But outside of that, that fourth line has looked really sharp. And I think even today, Sheldon Keefe said that line's probably been the best line over this last month right now in terms of consistency. And that game against Boston, to me, solidified that line. It looked like one of those games that replicated a Game 7 where there's not a lot called and not a lot of space for offense, that you need your bottom 6 to kind of rise to the occasion. And then that bing, bang, boom play that play from Aston Reese to Sam Lafferty to connect for that goal. They didn't get the result in the end because of overtime, but that to me looked like that fourth line can't be changed. That if I see a spot for Knies, I think it actually might come out in the top 9. I think maybe, I don't want to say Michael Bunting necessarily, but maybe a winger there comes out if the offense isn't going and you look to lean on Knies' offensive abilities, because asking him to to kind of just be this defensive guy that's not going to demonstrate his talents may not be the right fit for him. What do you think about that?
Well, you mentioned a winger, and I'm just looking down, the roster, and if it's a winger, it could be Bunting. It's not going to be Marner. It's not going to be Nylander or Tavares. So it's either Bunting or Kerfoot. I don't think Yarncroc in his 20 goals comes out. But that said, Kerfoot's got 10 goals. Zach Aston Reese, I'm surprised he has 10 goals. It's going to be a tough lineup to crack, but he's going to get in. And the size is the big thing. This isn't Dennis Malgin jumping in. This is a very productive, potentially player. It's going to get a chance to crack it, but I just don't know where he cracks it. We'll have more after game one. They'll get to reassess, see where a tweak might be needed if it's needed. If not, he'll remain a black ace and watch from the press box until the time comes. So just stay ready, Matthew, because you may get your opportunity.
But also 23 playoff games in the NHL over 4 years with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so there's certainly that experience there that the Leafs are pushing to lean on in that fourth line role. And he's been really good. A lot of those goals did come later in the season. And he really kind of seemed to kind of know what his role is on this team, which is bring the hits, don't force anything, but be aggressive, play sound defensively. And if you do all those things, you'll have your opportunities for offense on the other side. And he's certainly caught up with that. And Matthew Knies, you mentioned Knies rhymes with size. This is where we miss you on the beat, Henny, because I would have loved to see Matthew Knies' face when you just say that to him, whether it's on camera or even off. But you certainly haven't shied away from that. But Matthew Knies, interesting development there. 3 regular season games, all on the road, was in Florida, was in Tampa, site of the Leafs first round series. And then he flies back to Minnesota to come back to Florida and goes to New York, and then now finally gets in there. Usually with late season acquisitions, they're staying at a hotel, but this was a unique situation. It's a rookie. He went all the way to the Frozen Four finals, so he gets a short period of time. But on the way back, Captain John Tavares says, "Where are you staying? You want to stay with us?" And he's staying with John Tavares. If there's anyone you can learn from, that's Captain. That's a leadership right there. And he was certainly thrilled about that, because going to a new team, coming home for the first time, I don't think he really wanted to be isolated. And now he's going to hang with one of the best you can hang with, and kind of learn some of the good habits early on.
John and his wife, I think they've got a couple of kids. I assume Matthew's taken the babysitting course. So he's good for $5 an hour. They've got a built-in babysitter. Sidney Crosby lived with Mario. It makes sense, right? You've got a chance. And Sidney was a lot younger. He was 18 years of age. But it's like a billet. These guys have been used to billets, maybe not necessarily at the collegiate level, but anybody who's come through the junior ranks, you're living in a home and you've got the comforts of home, and you've got the wisdom of John Tavares. And, I'm just looking for that quote that was earlier today, when he was asked about, the playoffs and going up against Tampa. Don't let the pressure outweigh the pleasure of this opportunity. Yeah. Wouldn't you want your young rookie to be living with that guy? I think it's a really good fit in a nice neighborhood, not far from the practice rink and not too far from the downtown rink as well. So I'm all for it. You just grow, and it's just, you put yourself into that kind of aquarium, and the fish is going to grow even bigger. And it's going to be more about skating and X's and O's, but there's going to be philosophy in all these other things that will enable Matthew to make the transition, which he has to the National Hockey League, but now to playoff hockey. And I don't doubt he's going to get a chance at some point to get in.
Yeah, I'm certain of that as well. Even if it's not performance-based, it could be injury-based. It happens. Especially in deep runs, you need guys. That's why the Leafs loaded on depth, because you just never know who's going to be called upon. And if there's anything Sheldon Keefe is known for doing, injury or not, it's change. And that's going to be a big theme in this podcast. And that's why I track the lines so much, because we tried to kind of look at lines, and these lines have played together, but they really haven't been, the forwards haven't been healthy, and the rotation's been in and out so much that we haven't seen an ideal look for the Toronto Maple Leafs from lines 1 to 4. and then the defensive pair from 1 to 3 with so many guys sitting in and out. But we got to look at it. And Ryan O'Reilly, the big trade deadline, well, we say deadline, but he was actually acquired a couple weeks before that from the St. Louis Blues. He is centering a line with John Tavares and William Nylander, and O'Reilly being in the middle, Tavares on the wing is nothing new. They actually tried that in O'Reilly's first game here. And I wonder what you make of that, because John Tavares has played in some of those games, and he mentioned at times that was a bit of an adjustment, but that is an overloaded second line for those home games when you have the second line change, something I don't think the Leafs have had in quite some time.
Yeah, it's incredible. When I look at O'Reilly and I look at face-off percentage, Dave, and I see 62%, and John Tavares is no slouch when it comes to the face-off dot. I just think it gives Sheldon a few more choices. You know, you've got Matthews at 52.4%, Achari at 55.4%, and Kampf at 51.5%. Leafs are second or third overall. I think they're third overall in terms of face-off percentage. So, having Ryan O'Reilly in the middle, Toronto's fourth at 53.1%, Tampa's at 11th at 51.6%. I just like what you've got with a player as good as Ryan O'Reilly in the middle, even with that broken finger still on the mend, essentially. I just think he offers so much at 62%, and he's a perfect complement to the other two guys. And I like what Tavares can do in terms of working the sideboards and digging out pucks, as I do O'Reilly. But again, I think you're going to see these guys switch from time to time and provide a different look when needed, but I've got no problem at 62% with Ryan O'Reilly pushing the captain to the left side.
It seems, just based on patterns and looking at what Sheldon Keefe has done and just kind of reading between the lines a little bit, it seems like there might be two different looks, one for home, one for the road.
Yep.
Now, he kind of poured a little bit of cold water on that today by saying it's difficult to do matchups. It's difficult to kind of just do it because so much of it has changed over the course of the years where sometimes it just matters on positions, right? If you're in the defensive zone draw, you want your best defensive players out there. If you're in an offensive zone draw, you want your offensive players out there. And so that does change some things, but I'm starting to think that there's going to be two real sound looks based on home and based on road and what the situation calls for. So you have what you have, that the lines that we've talked about for games 1 and 2 with some subtle tweaks if necessary. And then I think if the series is tied or it's fairly even or there's an adjustment or something that needs to be done, I think you see O'Reilly move down to the third line, Tavares back into the middle, and you spread out from a top 6 to a top 9 to just account for some of the secondary things that Tampa might want to deploy, something that Toronto was missing in the last series because, let's be real, they just didn't really have that dedicated third line center that you see from Stanley Cup championship teams until now. Now you really do have that, and I think that that's probably what we're going to see when the series shifts to Tampa.
All right, you see O'Reilly possibly dropping, so you're saying Calle Jarnkrok moves up into the top 6?
Yeah, but I don't even think it's a top 6 look at that point. I think it's a top 9.
Yeah.
Like Hassan, Reese-Camp, Lafferty seems to be the only one that kind of sticks. And at that point, you're just kind of spreading your wealth because that Kerfoot, Achari, Jarnkrok line, it's good. It's a good shutdown line, but so is the one underneath it.
Yeah.
And you need to generate some offense. And then you're worried about matchups with the second line changes that at that point you can move Jarnkrok up with Matthews and Marner, move Bunting down to either the second or third line. Bunting, Tavares, Nylander's been a line for at one point. And then you can do Knies, O'Reilly, Achari, which they've also done as well. And that insulates it a little bit as well. So I think that's what you're going to see. But again, the situation calls for, I don't know, like that just based on the way Sheldon Keefe has adjusted between home and road and what he's deployed this year, it's looking like he trusts O'Reilly so much that you're just going to see two different types of deployments from him.
Yeah, I'm perplexed. In years past, this wouldn't have even been a conversation because there would not have been the alternatives presented either to Mike Babcock or Sheldon, as head coach of the Maple Leafs. I look at that third line right now, and I think, 20 goals, 10 goals, 4 goals, I think, for Noel Acciari in the middle. That's 34 goals for a third line. That's pretty good. Now, can Yarncroc produce to that extent playing with those other two players? I'm not sure. And of course, this is the playoffs and the tempo. Everything changes in terms of the role they're going to be, bring. If they can chip in with a goal here or there, as the fourth line did in that game in Boston, then I think it's a good fit. But you're right. I mean, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, I think that's fairly solid. And we'll just see what else transpires as it moves on. It's going to be an interesting chess game. And how they match up, line-wise, I just don't see Tampa matching up against Toronto whatsoever. And I know we'll talk goaltending later on. The X factor for Tampa is going to be Vasilevsky. I just think Toronto, with what they've got and the depth they have, I just don't see Tampa being a match for this, and Toronto being able to match them grind for grind, because that's what this group, in terms of the Lightning, are going to try to bring to this series, and just bring Toronto into a bog and not let go. So we'll see how it all works out, but I like Toronto's speed. I like their ability to mix it up. And if that means O'Reilly's going down to the third line, I think you've still got 3 really effective scoring lines for Sheldon Keefe. And of course, that fourth line doing what they do.
Yeah. And so one of the other storylines here going into this is the power play. Yeah. At times overall it's been one of the tops in the league, but it's struggled in the playoffs in previous years. There's no question about it. And so over the course of the last week, the Maple Leafs started tinkering with PP1. It had always been Morgan Rielly at the point, and then John Tavares at the net, and you had Matthews and Marner on the flanks, and you had Nylander in the bumper. Sometimes Nylander and Tavares would kind of flip around. So other than that, that was your look. Now, what they've done is they've moved William Nylander from PP1 to PP2, and they've put Ryan O'Reilly into that PP1 spot. And in the games where I've noticed that's happened, there really has not been more of a balance in terms of, you've got a better player now on PP2 and Nylander, so let's divvy the minutes. In fact, Sheldon Keefe's comments kind of made it feel like since making that move, he's found it's actually kickstart Nylander's game at even strength. And that's interesting because I didn't necessarily look at this as some sort of maneuver to light a fire under Willie's butt, but it's interesting because, talking to William Nylander, he seems a little not super on board with the whole thing. And I can understand that. 28 of his points this year. He had a record season in goals and assists and points this year. But 28 of those come on the power play. I don't know. What do you make of this? I think I like what they're doing here. I actually liked Eric Gustafsson in PP1 when they did that, and they were going to keep that going with Morgan Rielly in the lineup against the Panthers. But then Gustafsson pulled up lame in the warm-up and couldn't play. And Luke Schenn, we talked about that story where he kind of had to, he didn't have a warm-up. He was on the extras bus. He didn't have a warm-up, and he didn't get a shift until the first TV timeout to kind of stretch out the legs a little bit. What do you make of this? Because this is a very interesting kind of look. I should add the caveat that Sheldon Keefe also said they have enough data with William Nylander there that if things aren't going well, they could at any time switch back to it. Yeah.
Some of those great power play teams, I think of the Rangers with Brian Leetch, they have a point presence in terms of drawing players out to have to respect that shot from the point. I don't think Toronto's really in a position where they've got that, although I do like, Gustafsson back there and what he's able to do and getting pucks through. But I think the majority of this team's success is going to come inside what they call the F1 zone, and that'd be Tavares, O'Reilly getting the puck in there, getting plenty of puck movement, but finding a seam to get it in on net to provide a rebound for F1, or just simply getting it in there some way, somehow, and spreading things around as a Nylander can do. He's an outstanding passer from the sideboard, and we know what Mitch can do in that regard as well. But I think Tampa is going to collapse down. They're going to make things as tight as possible for Toronto's forwards in front of, Andre Vasilevsky. But there's an opportunity now from a point, given the time and space that whoever it's going to be, whether it be Morgan Riley or eventually, the Swede, we'll see. I just think that the majority of Toronto's goals are going to be manufactured from in tight range, from in front. And that's the way it's going to be happening. And so I think I'm okay with it. Again, you don't want to overthink this too much. Again, it's a buffet of so many choices here for Sheldon Keefe. Let's see how game one goes. Let's see how Tampa adjusts to this. And the other thing is, Dave, let's see if Toronto will get a power play. They were 21st in power play minutes drawn this season. Now, the top 15 teams on the power play in the National Hockey League, only the Rangers, Devils, and Capitals drew less power play minutes than the Toronto Maple Leafs. I've never understood that given the talent on this Toronto team, but that's a topic for another day, and it is what it is. So anyway,
I can mention a little bit on that. I remember last season, it took a very long time for Austin Matthews to draw a penalty, and that didn't make a lot of sense. And it got to the point where Sheldon Keefe mentioned it. He said, it's kind of weird we're at this point in the season that hasn't happened yet. And that's kind of strange. And that was a strategic, subtle jab being like, hey, just be aware of this. Like whether you have this bias or subconscious or not, that's kind of odd that hasn't been happening. So they did what they did there. There's been a lot of officiating. It's been a huge theme. The one thing, especially last year, and I remember this, and we've talked about this, is games 1 through 6 were uncharacteristically penalty filled. Like to the point where it looked like the standard was early regular season and not playoffs. Like it surprised me. It really did. It's probably what the Leafs weren't expecting either. And unfortunately for them, they got caught on it on some of the wrong times, most notably Alex Kerfoot game 6. Even though game 7 didn't have a lot of penalties, there's Justin Hall pick, which you've mentioned a few times as well. So, there have been those things. So now they have these different personnel and different players that can kind of adjust to different kind of situations. So that'll be interesting. And we'll get into that in Tampa's gameplay when we come back on the other side of a break. You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog, Canada's choice for free casino games, poker tips, and sports odds. Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game. And welcome back to Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds where everyone goes to play. David Alter with Paul Hendrick. And it is time for the Bodog line of the day. And Henny, of course, it is the playoffs. We're previewing the series. So it would make the most sense to kind of look at where the Toronto Maple Leafs are favored in this series with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And according to Bodog right now, Toronto is a minus 165 favorite. That means you have to bet $165 to win $100 if you have Toronto going through that. Toronto is up plus 1,000 for a 4-game sweep, and I saw ESPN was making that as their bold prediction. I'm not sure if I'd be willing to go there. At least they highlighted it as a bold prediction. But, the best of sevens, the Leafs seem to have not been able to escape 7-game series. And if you look at that one, Toronto winning that is a plus 400. While Lightning is a plus 550. What do you make of that? Do you think Toronto is the favorite this time? And I know what your answer will be. Do you think they get this job done this time?
Yes, I do. I even thought it 3 weeks ago. I think Toronto in 6 games. What might worry me is the X factor, as I've mentioned, goaltender Andre Vasilevsky, a mediocre .915 save percentage by his standards this season. But in the last 3 playoff seasons where they went to 3 consecutive cups and won 2 of those, Dave, he was .928. If he is able to do anything close to that, this could be another heartbreaking year in the first round for Leafs Nation. That said, Tampa's lost 11 of their last 15 road games. They are not the road juggernaut that they have been in years past. Toronto's a hell of a home team, as is Tampa, but Toronto gets the extra home game. So I agree with all of this. Toronto should be favored, and I think it's going to be 6 games. And I think this Toronto team is ready now emotionally to step up. They've got 7 different guys in this lineup than they did from a year ago. The curse of what has happened in first rounds over the last 6 seasons does not factor in with this group. I think they're going to be ready. And as JT said, don't let the pressure outweigh the pleasure of this opportunity. They're looking forward to getting this series started and eventually winning it.
Yeah, let's talk about the goaltending for a second. Ilya Samsonov, more than likely expected 99.99% will be the starter for the Toronto Maple Leafs, game number 1. He's been really in the last, those games against Boston, against Florida, a really telling point of where he is in his game right now. Finishes the season at .919 save percentage. That is the best save percentage of any Leafs goaltender that has started or appeared in at least 25 games since Jonathan Bernier's first game with the Maple Leafs in 13-14. Remember, he didn't finish that year. He got hurt. But when he was healthy, the Maple Leafs were second in the Eastern Conference at that point. Then he got hurt in that game. I believe it was against the Kings. You'll remember better than I will. And then that's when James Reimer had to come in, and he was kind of hurt as well. And that was the whole JK. And that was kind of where everything kind of really went south. Yeah. They went 8 straight games without a point. And they really fell off a cliff at that point. But just pointing out Bernier's numbers before then, he was lights out. He was .922 that season. And Samsonov at .919. This is going to be a big year to see if all the mental stuff is going to carry over from what he's worked on with Curtis Sanford, who was also first-year staffer with the Maple Leafs. And if he can carry that to stay in the moment going into the playoffs, because over 2 years, save percentage was .907. Had tough opponents in both of those years, but the Caps didn't look particularly good. And I'm really curious to see if you think that Samsonov has got what it takes, and he's saying all the right things, that he's in that right moment right now, but he's really a different kind of goaltender than the Maple Leafs have had. Maybe he's enough to get them over the hump. I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think he is enough. And my only concern is he's had 8 playoff appearances, just 1 playoff victory, but he's got a pretty balanced group in front of him. And on this exact podcast, you're looking back in the past, Toronto defensively is just a much better hockey club. And I think the last 10 games for Toronto, a chance for Sheldon to sort of finalize some things, even though the lineup bounced around, especially after they clinched second place in home ice for the first round. The Leafs gave up 23 goals in their last 10 games. I mean, that's what they're about. They did not score as much as they did a year ago, but their goals against has been brought down. They're finally playing the hockey, as I mentioned on this podcast a few weeks ago, that Mike Babcock needed them to play, but knew they couldn't play because the maturity wasn't there. It's there now. They've got a Stanley Cup champion in Ryan O'Reilly, who brings all that he brings. And we're going to talk about the defense as well and the balance that they present. This is just a better team defensively in front than we have seen in previous Leaf years. And as a result, I think Samsonov is going to be insulated from what he might be able to see. And there's enough talent and self-confidence for him to go on a bit of a roll and parlay that .919 save percentage this season into the postseason.
Yeah, let's talk about that defense. Luke Schenn seems to have won out the number 6 spot that had seemed to be up for grabs up since mid-February, really, when they acquired him and they acquired Eric Gustafsson and traded away Rasmus Sandin and didn't really have a good look. But of course, Jake McCabe was the big X factor in there. He immediately moves to the top 4. He's really become the quote-unquote Muzzin replacement, if you will, in that spot. And so there's no doubt about Jake McCabe. But Luke Schenn was interesting. He's got into that spot. There's been times where there's been some mistakes, and we've talked about how, he's the 6'7", but he really did come into his own in that game against Tampa last week, where it was another one of these physical games where there was a lot of message sending and he was there to kind of help respond, whether it was a fight with Pat Maroon, a goal. It was one of those games where the Leafs have kind of had before that they didn't have maybe that same kind of presence in there. And you have a two-time Cup champion now on that side. He's playing against that team where he won those Cups, and the core kind of looks very much the same. I wonder, like, do you think Shen plays in every game, or is this a little bit of message sending that, you know, if the game calls for more offense than physicality, then maybe this is where, you know, at times you're going to be asked to kind of sit the odd game or two, something that he's kind of understood as the assignment, because even in those previous years, he did not play every game.
No, I don't know if he's going to play every game. I think, you know, especially for the emotion and intensity that's going to go into that opening game, I think you want his physicality there. I think you want that physicality in Tampa as well, as we saw he was able to do last week. But I think at some point, whether it's Gustafsson or Liljegren, you're going to see a change on the right wing, and maybe Shen does come out and you make him a more effective player moving forward. That said, the experience, even as limited as it was for the 2 Stanley Cup rings that he won with Tampa, it was so damn valuable. And I think you want him in there, just given the grit and size and just pain in the ass tenacity that he's going to see from the likes of a Perry, from the likes of a Maroon. I mean, there are a bunch of those guys who are not going to be able to play well against, but the human eraser is going to be out there. And there's no doubt that the bench, when they're watching that physicality, just really, really gets excited and motivated to go out there and play hard and well themselves. And I think he's a nice sort of balance with Riley. It's the important thing for me is not where Shen is. It's McCabe and Brody. I think those two have to stick together. Giordano and Hull, Riley and Shen. I don't know really officially who is your second pairing, but we do know that McCabe and Brody is the top pairing. They're the shutdown guys, and they're what is going to be needed. But it's nice to have a player like Luke Shen who's just reveling in this celebrity and the years of experience and the Stanley Cup rings. I think he's perfect for what they need. I think he's been better than what they expected him to be. I think he's overproduced in that regard. And that fight with Patrick Maroon last week, I loved it. I mean, these were two guys that saw each other in the hallway downstairs. The one room is like 30 meters down from the other room. And the chit chat and what goes on. But when it comes out there, it's all business. They're going to bring the business to Luke Shen. I guarantee you they're going to, just to find a way to up them the apple cart. But I think Luke's going to be more than up to it. And having hung out with that group, in the big quality moments, whether beyond the ice or off the ice, is going to be a major bonus for the Maple Leafs moving forward. So I'm all for Luke Shen starting this game. And you've got a pair of wheels with Morgan Riley on the other side to compensate for. But Morgan's a better player, knowing they've got the muscle of Luke Shen playing the right side with him, technically, I guess, on their third pairing.
So let's talk about what Tampa might bring, because they've brought a lot to the Toronto Maple Leafs in terms of their prowess, their pedigree, physicality, the elite players that they have. And yeah, they've been on a bit of a downswing, but they kind of know when it's time to kind of, put it all out there, they do it. They went through their own playoff issues in 2019 when they had the best record in the NHL, and then they got swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets. That was their humbling moment. And then they were able to turn that into 2 cups. But let's talk about that, because you mentioned Pat Maroon, who's now a 3-time Cup champion, because he went from that 19 team in St. Louis and helped them win and went to the finals for 4 straight years. But other than that, they have that ability to get under the Leafs' skin. And I wonder how much concern there might be in someone like a Michael Bunting, because they know they can really push his buttons and then maybe perhaps put the Leafs into a little bit of trouble. Didn't happen so much in that game. It was a regular season. I thought Bunting did his best to be on his best behavior in that one. But I wonder, with the stakes up, and this is going to be Michael Bunting's first ever game 1, because he missed it last year and he had an injury late in the year. I wonder if Tampa's going to try to game plan to put someone like Bunting in a vulnerable position to make sure the power plays go their way. What do you think?
I think they're going to go at Bunting, although I don't think Michael's going to be their main concern. I think, they want to keep Matthews and Marner off, and I think you're going to see guys at their faces. I can see Alex Killorn playing a very important role, given his size and the grit that he brings. And of course, he's capable of producing offensively. So I don't know if necessarily Bunting is going to be a source. I think they're going to keep Michael on the side of contempt rather than chaos and play within a certain role without getting himself or the team in trouble. I slip down the rest of the Toronto lineup. I don't know. I don't see these guys being intimidated whatsoever. I think they know what Tampa's going to be bringing at them. This is just a damn fine dress rehearsal, which last year's series provided. And I think the Leafs are going to be able to build off of it. And certainly Kyle Dubas traded for it to accommodate an opponent like Tampa. That's the beauty of where the Leafs and Tampa have been all season long. When Kyle went to the trade deadline, they had a darn good idea of who they were playing, how they were going to have to match up. And I think they match up well. And I don't necessarily see Bunting being a factor in a negative way. I think he can help this club. And, the key is scoring first. In Tampa this year, the stat that's kind of shocked me, they were 12, 24, and 7 when they did score first. So that's incredible, that particular number. I think the Leafs, if they're able to jump on these guys quickly, I think they've got a good chance of winning hockey games, winning the series, and maybe making this as quick as a 5-game series. But long story short, no, I don't think Bunting's going to be a factor in that regard. I think they're going to find him in an effective pass role. He's got plenty of role models on the other side, especially Corey Perry. And I think if he can play in a similar fashion, he can be very effective to what the Leafs have to do. I'm not sure whether you agree with that, but that's the way I see it.
Yeah, Corey Perry seems to be the kryptonite of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that's always the one factor you have to watch for, just how he did it with Montreal, how he did it with Tampa last year, and he's back. It's Corey Perry. If Corey Perry was on another team, maybe that team's playing the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round.
Yeah.
You just never know with the way it seems, and it's just been one of those things that were talked about. But it's interesting how Corey Perry's been one of those few guys that have managed to go from one of the elite players in the league, and then when he didn't have that he was able to adjust and be a bottom 6 guy and do that for many years now, where he's just been able to kind of settle into that role. And when it comes time to perform in these playoffs, he's done it. Even with Dallas before Tampa, that was the case.
Exactly.
So like he just knows he is playoffs all over them. And so Corey Perry is going to be that factor. He's on that second power play unit as well, and they use that unit a little bit more than Toronto uses there. So there's that. And I think the biggest blow to Tampa was they had a trade deadline acquisition in Tanner Jeannot. That injury looked really nasty. He's going to miss the beginning of the series. Might come back later. We'll see. That does hurt, especially when you look at what they traded to get him. So you want to talk about Nick Foligno deals. That one is going to hurt if Tampa's out early and they gave up as much as that they did. Although in Tanner Jeannot's case, he is a restricted free agent, so they do have control over Jeannot's situation for next year, whether he's there or they trade him away or whatever they decide to do. But, all the reports with Tanner Jeannot was he plays Tampa's game. And that was someone I was looking, not forward to seeing, but I just was curious to see how he would be a factor at all in the Toronto Maple Leafs, because he seemed like a counter move for Tampa in that regard. So that's going to be very interesting, but it's going to be exciting. We'll end on this. We can't talk about Tampa without talking about John Cooper. Now, John Cooper seems to be the master of mind games and bulletin board material and the right things to say going into it. I'll never forget, we were in Brandon, Florida, which is a suburb of Tampa, between games 3 and 4, where Tampa practices. And he was asked about if they just have to kind of get to, if Jack Campbell or just the goaltending has been a factor in this series, as Campbell was playing pretty well up until that point. And he said, well, we just haven't gotten to the net. Like, I'm not worried about that. When we get to the net, we'll be fine. And then what happened was, Tampa just shot the lights out in that opening period and pretty much chased Jack Campbell out of the game. And I remember it was very vivid that Sheldon Keefe talking to Jack on the bench with his hand covered over his mouth that just explained to him why he was pulling him out of the game. And so it worked. After the game in that game against the Leafs last week, there was a scrum after every whistle. After every whistle, there was extracurricular activities. And then after the game, John Cooper said that the game lacked intensity, which was very interesting. And I wonder, is that actually helping his team, or is that actually going to provide bulletin board material for the Leafs this time? Because that game certainly did not lack intensity.
No, it didn't. So if you're going to run across a farmyard, you're going to step into what John Cooper was serving up last week. He started that first game lineup we're going to see Tuesday night. They played last week. No, he planted a seed with Jack Campbell. And you know what? Seeds take root with Jack Campbell. Jack is not the most secure goaltender. Frederik Andersen, same thing, not the most secure goaltender. What I like about Ilya Samsonov is the fact he can bounce with this. Now, granted, we don't have a major sample size in which to go from, but his ability always to bounce back after rough stretches this season really impressed me. I think it's one of the reasons why, obviously, he's the elite number one goaltender right now. So I think he's going to be able to handle that. And John Cooper is a master. He's a lawyer. He's a bright guy. He's won at every level he's been at. He's a tremendous person. As a reporter, he'll always give you a great answer, right? You want to make sure you come up with a good question.
He also turns it up when Toronto comes to town. He just knows. He knows the magnifying glass.
Always.
Yeah.
Always has. Always. So, anyway, I cannot wait. I wish the Leafs were starting Monday night.
Me too.
And of course, I'm still in Madrid, Spain. The games won't start till 1:30 in the morning here. I can be dead, dog beat, tired, but what are you going to do, right? It's just the way it is. Hey, before we sign off, Dave, I was thinking of Ron Hainsey today, and, he went 12 straight years without playing in the playoffs before the Penguins acquired him in the spring of 2017. He was their seventh defenseman. He was just pure depth, and he ended up playing on the top pairing given all the injuries that spring to Pittsburgh's blue line, and finally won a Stanley Cup after 859 games and never having made the playoffs. And Jake McCabe, 11 NHL seasons, 504 NHL games, finally getting a chance to make the playoffs. And it'd be nice to see the correlation in the Leafs maybe winning the Cup. I'm not sure that's going to happen this year. Could happen next year, but they've got an opportunity. And I think the Hainsey-McCabe correlation is just an interesting one, given how hard it is. And you don't necessarily have to have Cup experience to come in and help a team win a Stanley Cup. Hainsey and maybe McCabe will be proof of that.
Yeah, and for listeners who don't know the story, when the Toronto Maple Leafs acquired Jake McCabe in that deal along with Sam Lafferty on February 28th, I believe it was. Actually, it was before that. It was before that because they made other trades then. But when we spoke to Kyle Dubas in their hotel in Seattle, which is where they held the availability, he was asked about the lack of playoff experience with someone like a Jake McCabe and role that he was going to play. And he actually specifically cited Ron Hainsey in asking about that in terms of what it is. And the truth of the matter is you just don't know until they get there. And Ron Hainsey is an excellent example of when you put guys in situations you don't know until they get there. It's kind of a sink or swim moment where you kind of have to give them the opportunity to go in and see what they can do. The Leafs have already loaded up on a ton of playoff experience with all of their other acquisitions. You can see it was a big theme going into the summer. When they got at Zach Aston-Reese, like I mentioned in that first segment, he had 4 years of playoff experience. Ryan O'Reilly has Stanley Cup playoff experience. Noel Acciari's got playoff experience against the Toronto Maple Leafs in those Boston Bruins years. So they already loaded up at every different facet. Ilya Samsonov now, they have a goalie who's got the playoff experience. I mean, Frederik Andersen had some playoff experience, but they've got it in every other aspect that it just wasn't going to be one of those situations where they were going to turn down acquiring a big top four guy solely because he didn't have playoff experience. They know he's got the tools. And so now, and you actually gave me a good idea of who I'm going to try to talk to for tomorrow. So yeah, Jake McCabe is going to be that guy that's going to kind of factor in there. And he's been the only one of those additions that has been an everyday top four guy. When they had Jake Muzzin go down, initially they kind of said they were going to gotta go by committee, but there was this opportunity to get someone like McCabe, who not only did they get someone like McCabe, they got him at half the price. And I still shake my head at Kyle Davidson for allowing that to happen. Good for Toronto, but that was unprecedented for you to trade for a good player at half the price for 2 more years after this. If you're a Chicago fan, you have to be spinning because you're in rebuild mode, but you could turn it around quickly. And in 24-25 to give up someone that good, I mean, the return should have been bigger, but the Leafs definitely won out in that. And the playoff experience might have been a concern if they didn't have everyone surrounding him in that spot. But just like with Timothy Liljegren, they didn't know if he could handle top 4 until they had injuries to Morgan Rielly and TJ Brody, and he was able to handle that. And if they have injuries, Timothy Liljegren's going to be able to come up and lean on that experience as well. So the Maple Leafs are very well equipped, and so are we at Rinkwide Toronto, and we'll come back at you following Game 1 for the first ever post-game edition of Rinkwide Toronto. Make that the post-game playoff edition. It's going to be certainly exciting. For Paul Hendrick, I'm David Alder. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, presented by Bodog, sports odds, poker tips, and free casino games. It's time to play Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.